All right, let's talk about becoming a polymath. You've probably heard that term and, immediately pictured someone like Leonardo da Vinci, just this total genius in like a dozen different fields. It sounds incredible, right? But it also sounds kind of impossible. Well, today we're going to cut through the noise. We're going to break down the actual research-backed framework for how you can build that kind of multidisciplinary expertise. So first things first, what are we really talking about here? A polymath? It's not just someone who's good at trivia night, okay? It's someone with deep, genuine expertise in a bunch of different, often totally unrelated fields. You've got the classic example, Da Vinci, right? A master of art, engineering, and anatomy. But hey, let's get modern. Think about a guy like Johnny Kim. He was a decorated Navy SEAL who then went and became a Harvard-trained doctor and is now a NASA astronaut. I mean, wow, that's the level of mastery we're trying to figure out. Okay, so if you've ever looked up how to become a polymath, you've probably seen this advice, right? Just read a lot, be curious, connect ideas, and your brain will just magically connect all the dots for you. It sounds super romantic and inspiring, but let's be honest, it's also pretty vague, isn't it? But here's the thing. What if that advice isn't just vague? What if it's actually wrong? See, the truth is, your brain doesn't just automatically connect knowledge from different areas. That's not how it works. And following that common wisdom, it can lead you down a completely wrong path, leaving you frustrated. So what's the right way to do it? All right, let's start with the single biggest mistake people make. Seriously, this is the trap that keeps most aspiring polymaths from ever reaching true mastery in anything. And this is the absolute heart of the problem. The huge mistake is confusing being a polymath with being a dabbler. You know the type, right? Someone who spends, say, 3 months learning guitar, then they jump to Spanish for a bit, then they try graphic design. They're just collecting hobbies and a bunch of surface-level factoids. A polymath, though, they build deep, hard-won expertise, one field at a time. And believe me, that difference is absolutely everything. See, here's what real expertise feels like. It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about building this deep, nonverbal intuition. It's like the chess master who just sees the right move instantly, or the expert programmer who just knows where the bug is hiding in thousands of lines of code. It's not magic. It's what happens after thousands of hours of practice. Your brain starts recognizing patterns so deeply that it's all subconscious. And that's why if you ask them how they do it, they'll usually say something like, I don't know, you just get a feel for it. They're not trying to be mysterious. That kind of deep pattern recognition is just genuinely hard to explain with words. So the big question is, how do you build that feel? How do you get that intuition? Well, that brings us to our first core strategy. And honestly, it's probably the complete opposite of what you're thinking. The secret to going wide is to first go incredibly deep. Let's circle back to Johnny Kim for a second, because his story is the perfect playbook. He didn't try to become a SEAL, a doctor, and an astronaut all at the same time. No way. Look at his path. First, he went all in and achieved total mastery as a Navy SEAL. Then he took that deep foundation, all that discipline, that insane pattern recognition, that knowledge of how to learn under pressure, and he leveraged it to get through Harvard Medical School. Then he used the depth from both of those experiences to crush it as an astronaut. You see, each new expertise was built right on top of the solid foundation of the last one. And this is where it gets really interesting. Here's the payoff. I know going super deep in one thing first sounds slow, right? But it's actually a massive accelerator, because once you learn what true mastery feels like in one domain, once you know how to build that intuition from scratch, you can learn your second field about 40% faster. Why? Because you've built a meta skill. You've literally learned how to learn at an expert level. Okay, so let's say you've done it. You've built your first deep area of expertise. Awesome. But now comes the next big challenge. How do you get your knowledge in, say, music theory to actually help you with computer programming? Because like we said before, it doesn't just happen on its own. You have to actively, and I mean actively, force those connections. Check out this amazing study from 3M. They took a hard look at their inventors, and they found they basically fell into 3 groups. First, you had the specialists. These guys were super deep in one area. They made some really cool tech, but nobody ever bought it. Then you had the generalists. They knew a little bit about a lot of things. They had tons of ideas, but none of them really worked. But then there was the third group, the polymaths. These were the people who had that deep expertise in one core area, but had also dabbled and worked across a bunch of others. And get this, they were the only ones creating commercially successful, game-changing innovations. The reason? They could spot a pattern in one field and apply it to solve a problem in a completely different one. So, how do you actually train your brain to do that? Here's a super practical technique you can start using right now. It's called using comparison. The next time you learn a really important concept, let's say feedback loops in a business context, don't just leave it there. Immediately force yourself to find 2 or 3 examples of that same pattern in totally different fields. What does a feedback loop look like in climate science? What about in your personal relationships or in machine learning? Then actually write down what makes the underlying pattern the same in all of them. What you're doing is literally building neural bridges in your brain. Okay, let's get to our third and final strategy, and I've got to say, this one is probably the weirdest one yet. It's this idea that struggling and even failing before you're taught something is one of the most powerful learning hacks out there. I know, that sounds completely backwards, right? Like, why on earth would you try to solve a tough math problem before you've even learned the formula? It just sounds like you're setting yourself up for frustration. But the research on this is absolutely clear and overwhelming. So get this, in a huge review of 53 different studies, scientists found this unmistakable pattern. The students who were forced to struggle with problems before they were shown the solutions did, on average, 13% better on the final tests than the students who just studied the material first. Think about it. When you struggle, your brain becomes hyper-aware of the gaps in your knowledge. So when the answer finally shows up, it doesn't just go in one ear and out the other, it clicks into place perfectly. And it gets even more extreme than that. Check this out. There was one study where students took a practice test on stuff they hadn't even seen yet, and they ended up scoring almost 50% higher than the group that didn't. Just the act of trying and failing primed their brains to soak up the information when they finally saw it. They were actively hunting for the answers, not just passively sitting there and listening. This whole idea is part of a concept that researchers call desirable difficulties. These are little tricks that make learning feel harder in the short term, but lead to way better memory in the long run. 3 big ones are interleaving, that's mixing different types of problems or skills in one practice session instead of doing them in blocks. Spacing, which just means spreading your learning out over a few days instead of cramming it all in at once. And of course, pre-testing, which is what we just talked about, trying to answer questions before you even see the material. So, we've covered a lot of ground. What does this all mean for you right now? Let's boil everything down into a simple 3-step action plan you can start using today. Here's the bottom line. Forget that vague, romantic advice to just be curious. The real, actionable path has 3 clear steps. Number 1, go deep first. You have to build that real, intuitive expertise in one field before you even think about branching out. Number 2, use comparison. Actively force your brain to connect the dots and see the same patterns across totally unrelated domains. And number 3, embrace the struggle. Use those desirable difficulties like pre-testing to make your brain hungry for the answers. So that's the framework. It really isn't about being some kind of born genius. It's just about following a smarter, more effective process. Which really just leaves us with one final, very important question. And this one's for you. Knowing what you know now, what will your first deep field be?